He made the world laugh for 4 decades. But behind the performances and the improvised characters and the warmth that came through every screen, there was a person whose real life contained stories more extraordinary than anything in any of his films. Some of these stories are about generosity so large it defied logic. Some are about darkness that ran deeper than the public ever knew. All of them are true. These are 10 unbelievable Robin Williams stories. Story 10: The Lonely Boy Nobody Knew. Robin McLaurin Williams was born on July 21, 1951, at St. Luke's Hospital in Chicago, Illinois. His father, Robert Fitzgerald Williams, was a senior executive at Ford's Lincoln Mercury division. His mother, Lori McLaurin Williams, was a former fashion model from Mississippi. By any external measure, the household was wealthy, stable, and privileged. The family lived in a large house in the well-off Detroit suburb of Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. And yet Robin Williams grew up profoundly alone. His father worked long hours and was frequently absent. His mother was similarly unavailable in meaningful emotional ways, not unkind, but not present. The house, by multiple accounts, was filled with staff and enormous rooms that a small boy moved through largely by himself. Williams had a vast collection of toy soldiers, hundreds of them, arranged across the floors and tables of his room. He did not have neighborhood friends in any conventional sense. He had his imagination. He attended the Detroit Country Day School, an elite private institution, and then the Gorton School in Lake Forest, Illinois, after the family relocated. At various points, his school experience involved mockery and social difficulty. He was not the class clown in the way mythology later reimagined him. He was quiet, awkward, and working overtime to figure out how to connect with other people. His mother later admitted, in terms reported widely after his death, that she had not realized how lonely he had been during those years. She said she had believed she was being a wonderful mother, but may not have been. Williams himself spoke about the loneliness with clarity in various interviews across his career. He described trying to make his mother laugh as the foundational experience of his life, that the first laugh he got from her was the one that got him hooked. The performance instinct, the desire to transform a room's emotional temperature through comedy, began in those empty Michigan corridors with a small boy discovering that the right voice at the right moment could cut through any silence. The irony of a man who made the whole world feel seen and accompanied, having spent his formative years feeling invisible, is one of the stranger realities in his biography. It also explains more about where the urgency in his performance came from than almost any other fact in his life. The next story involves the beginning of a friendship so improbable and so deep that it lasted until the very end. And it started with 2 wildly different young men in a New York acting school. Story 9: The Russian Doctor and the Man Who Was Superman. In 1973, Robin Williams received a full scholarship to one of the most competitive and demanding acting programs in the United States, the Juilliard School in New York City. He was one of only 20 students accepted into the freshman class, and he and one other student, Christopher Reeve, were the only 2 selected by the legendary acting teacher John Houseman for the school's prestigious advanced program. The acceptance was remarkable. Williams had dropped out of Claremont Men's College, transferred to the College of Marin, and was now suddenly in a room with some of the most rigorously trained young actors in the country. He and Reeve were, by most descriptions, opposites. Reeve had attended Cornell University and came from a structured classical theater background. Williams arrived in tie-dyed shirts and track pants, talking at a velocity that seemed to leave the room itself slightly dazed. Reeve would later describe his first impression of Williams as watching someone like an untied balloon that had been inflated and immediately released, caroming off walls, impossible to contain or fully follow. They became close friends. Not similar friends, close ones. The friendship was built on a quality each recognized in the other: the absolute commitment to doing the work in a way that had nothing to do with performance approval. Both went on to extraordinary careers, though in very different directions. Reeve became famous worldwide as Superman in 1978. Williams became famous worldwide as Mork from Ork on Mork and Mindy, which debuted the same year. They remained close even as their lives became public phenomena. In May 1995, Christopher Reeve was thrown from a horse during a riding event in Culpeper, Virginia. He landed on his head. The injury was catastrophic, a complete fracture of the first and second cervical vertebrae. Reeve was paralyzed from the neck down, dependent on a ventilator to breathe. The surgery required to stabilize his spine carried roughly a 50% chance of survival. In the days following the accident, as Reeve lay in the hospital at the University of Virginia Medical Center in Charlottesville, overwhelmed by grief and terror about the surgery ahead, the door to his room flew open. A man walked in wearing hospital scrubs and a blue scrub cap, speaking in an exaggerated Russian accent. He announced that he was a proctologist and had arrived to perform an examination. Christopher Reeve recognized his friend. He laughed. It was the first time he had laughed since the accident. In his memoir, Still Me, published in 1998, Reeve would describe that moment in detail, how he had been contemplating the darkest possible thoughts before the door opened, how the laughter that followed changed something fundamental in his approach to what came next. He told an interviewer shortly after that, when he realized he could still laugh, he knew he could still live. Williams was the first person to make that happen. He was also one of the first people to arrive in Virginia after the accident. His family drove there within hours of learning the news. He joined Reeve's foundation board, helped with fundraising, and maintained the friendship with full dedication until Reeve's death on October 10, 2004. When Williams received a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Golden Globes the following January, he dedicated it to Reeve. Williams himself would be dead a decade later. But for Christopher Reeve's children, who spoke about the friendship years afterward, Williams represented something beyond affection. He was proof that the right person showing up at the right moment can change the trajectory of a life. Next is a story about a night Williams would carry with him for the rest of his life. A night that ended with his best friend dead, and Williams walking out of a party in the early hours of the morning, not knowing what was about to happen. Story 8. The Night at the Chateau Marmont. By the late 1970s, Robin Williams had arrived in Hollywood and was navigating the particular kind of stardom that the entertainment industry produces: sudden, disorienting, and surrounded by substances freely available to anyone with a famous face. The Mork and Mindy television series, which debuted in September 1978, had made him one of the most recognizable people in America almost overnight. He was 27 years old. During that period, Williams and John Belushi existed in the same social orbit. Belushi, born in 1949, was at the peak of his own explosive fame, the star of National Lampoon's Animal House and a central figure at Saturday Night Live. Both men were celebrated for a kind of electrifying, barely contained energy on stage and screen. Both were using cocaine heavily. On the night of March 4th, 1982, Williams was among the people gathered at Belushi's bungalow at the Chateau Marmont Hotel on Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles. He would later tell his Mork and Mindy co-star Pam Dauber that he had left the party because he was so deeply under the influence he could hardly stand. He walked out, returned home, and went to sleep. John Belushi was found dead in his bungalow that morning. He was 33 years old. The cause was a toxic combination of cocaine and heroin. Williams had been in that bungalow hours before Belushi died. What happened next inside Williams defined the next phase of his career. He described the shock of Belushi's death as unlike anything he had experienced. The loss of someone whose energy had seemed as unconquerable as his own, gone in a single night. In an interview with People magazine in 1988, Williams described what Belushi's death triggered in him, saying that it had caused a mass departure from that way of living among their entire circle, and that for him personally, there was also a child coming who changed everything. His first son, Zachary Pym Williams, was born in April 1983. Williams quit cocaine and alcohol cold turkey, without a formal rehabilitation program, through sheer will and the specific terror of becoming a father who could not be trusted with his own life. He maintained sobriety for nearly 20 years. In 2003, while filming The Big White on location in Alaska, he relapsed. He described the experience with devastating precision, walking into a store and seeing a small bottle of whiskey and hearing a voice in his head suggesting just one taste, followed by a week in which he was purchasing bottles so frequently he described the sound of walking as resembling a wind chime. He entered rehab in 2006. He checked back in again in July 2014, telling his team it was a precautionary measure. On August 11, 2014, exactly 5 weeks after checking into rehab, he was gone. But the night at the Chateau Marmont and the choice it produced represents one of the pivotal moments of his adult life, a turning point made possible by grief, by love, and by the proximity of consequences that could so easily have been his own. The story that follows is a more public confrontation between one of the most beloved entertainers in the world and one of the most powerful corporations in it. Story 7. The Disney Betrayal and the Picasso that only made it worse. In 1991, Disney approached Robin Williams about providing the voice of the genie for their upcoming animated film, Aladdin. Williams was wary. He had serious concerns about his voice being used for commercial purposes, specifically merchandise, advertisements, and promotional material. His philosophy was clear and direct. His voice was essentially his identity, and he was not willing to have it deployed in service of selling products. A formal agreement was reached. Disney would not use Williams's voice or likeness in any form for merchandising. In exchange, Williams accepted a payment of $75,000, a fraction of what he could have charged, and vastly below his standard film rate of approximately $8 million. He took the smaller fee deliberately, as a gesture of creative integrity. He described his motivation as wanting to do something genuinely wonderful for his children and for the tradition of animation. He recorded approximately 30 hours of material, written and improvised, and his performance was so extraordinary that the studio rewrote the entire film to make the genie its centerpiece. Aladdin was released in November 1992. It earned more than $200 million at the box office and became one of the studio's defining achievements of the decade. The merchandising machine activated immediately and enthusiastically. Williams's voice appeared in advertisements selling products directly connected to the film. Disney had breached the agreement. In November 1993, Williams went on The Today Show while promoting Mrs. Doubtfire. When the interviewer raised the subject of Aladdin, Williams described the situation plainly, explaining that the deal had been specific, that he did not sell products, that the voice was him, and that using it the way Disney had was the one thing he had made explicitly clear was off the table. Disney chairman Jeffrey Katzenberg, recognizing the scale of the problem and the enormous displeasure of someone whose goodwill was now entirely withdrawn, arranged for a Picasso painting to be sent to Williams as a gesture of reconciliation. The painting was a self-portrait of Picasso rendered as Vincent van Gogh. Its estimated value was approximately $1 million. Williams did not interpret it as an apology. He interpreted it as a company trying to make a problem disappear with money rather than acknowledge a wrong with words. The painting was hung in his living room, where it reportedly clashed violently with the room's other furnishings and exuded, in the description of someone who saw it there, the charm of a fright wig. Things did not improve until Katzenberg departed Disney in 1994 and was replaced by Joe Roth. Roth offered Williams the public apology he had been waiting for, not a painting, but an actual acknowledgement of what had happened. Williams returned to voice the genie in the 1996 direct-to-video production Aladdin and the King of Thieves. The story became one of the more widely told examples in Hollywood history of an artist defending a principle even when the commercial and professional pressures to simply accept a settlement were enormous. Next is a story about something Williams did entirely outside the public eye, an act of extraordinary generosity that the recipient kept private for years because Williams had asked him to. Story 6. The Open Heart. Williams and the people he chose to help. One of the more consistent patterns across the accounts of people who knew Robin Williams closely is that his generosity was both enormous and private. He did not publicize these things. He did not use them as part of his public image. They were simply what he did. In 1998, Williams visited the San Francisco Zoo and was introduced to Coco, a lowland gorilla famous for her ability to communicate using modified American Sign Language. At the time of the visit, Coco had been in a prolonged state of grief following the death of her companion. She had not smiled in 6 months. Williams sat with her, played with her hair, and made faces at her. Within minutes, Coco was laughing and initiating playful contact. The footage of the visit, widely circulated after his death, became one of the most emotionally resonant documents of who he was as a human being. Bradley Pierce, who played young Peter in Jumanji alongside Williams in 1995, has spoken about how Williams helped him through a period of severe personal crisis later in his life, crediting Williams directly with preventing him from making permanent choices during that period. Lisa Jacob, who played Williams's eldest daughter in Mrs. Doubtfire in 1993, was expelled from school while filming because she had spent too long on set. Williams wrote a formal letter to the school's administration on her behalf, describing her as a student of extraordinary caliber who should be encouraged to pursue learning through direct engagement with the world. The school did not reverse its decision, but Jacob later described the letter as one of the most formative experiences of her life. What these accounts share is a specific quality. Williams paid attention to the people around him. He noticed who was struggling, and found ways to reach them that were personal rather than generic. The generosity was always tailored. Story 5. Good Will Hunting and the Scene That Wasn't in the Script. Good Will Hunting was released in December 1997 and was, by any measure, one of the most significant films of Williams's career. He played Sean Maguire, a therapist and professor dealing with his own grief while working with a young mathematical genius, played by Matt Damon, who had spent his life using intelligence as armor against intimacy. The film was written by Damon and Ben Affleck, who were in their 20s at the time. It had taken years of development and passed through numerous studios before landing at Miramax. The role of Sean was Williams's, quiet, measured, carrying an interior weight that was the opposite of his stage presence. It was the kind of performance that required the audience to believe that the person on screen was not performing at all. The most celebrated scene in the film, a scene that became the subject of film discussions and analyses for decades, Sean tells Will the story of his late wife. He describes her imperfections with tenderness. He says that whatever problem Will thinks he has with him, he is not afraid of it. Then he repeats a phrase quietly. "It's not your fault." He says it again and again, until the defense collapses. Williams won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for this performance. At the ceremony on March 23, 1998, he accepted the award and gave one of the more memorable acceptance speeches in Oscar history. Emotional, funny, and entirely himself. He described his parents in terms that acknowledged his complicated relationship with them and expressed genuine astonishment at the award. Director Gus Van Sant, speaking in various retrospectives, has described the experience of working with Williams as one where the level of preparation and seriousness he brought to the role created something in the room that affected everyone. Damon, still young and still building his career, described watching Williams work as an education in how much a person could give to a single moment. The film earned 9 Academy Award nominations and won 2, for Williams and for the original screenplay. The next story involves a period of Williams's life that was hidden from almost everyone except those closest to him. Years when something was going wrong inside his brain that no one could yet identify or name. Story 4. The Disease Nobody Could Name. In 2013, Robin Williams began experiencing symptoms that initially presented as disconnected and manageable. Insomnia, an impaired sense of smell, constipation, mild tremors. These are the kinds of things a person approaching 60 might attribute to age, to stress, to the accumulated weight of a demanding career. But the symptoms did not stay manageable. Anxiety began building to a level that made ordinary situations feel overwhelming. His ability to remember lines, a skill so fundamental to his career that it had been essentially automatic for decades, began to fail. On film sets, he was increasingly requiring teleprompters and multiple takes for material he would previously have absorbed without effort. Paranoia set in. He began experiencing what those around him described as rapid, terrifying changes in mood and cognition. His wife, Susan Schneider Williams, watched all of this unfold across the final year of his life with mounting alarm. She later described the experience as trying to help someone fight an enemy that had not been identified yet, that every new symptom felt like a new ambush from something that had no name and therefore no possible treatment strategy. In May 2014, Williams was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. The diagnosis offered a framework. It explained some of the motor symptoms, the tremors, the movement difficulties, but it did not explain the cognitive and psychiatric symptoms, and the medications associated with Parkinson's treatment were not providing meaningful relief. Williams checked into the Hazelden Rehab Facility in Minnesota in July 2014. He told people it was preventative, that he wanted to maintain his sobriety. The people who knew him best believed it was also an attempt to find any environment that might provide some stability in a mind that was becoming frighteningly unreliable. On August 11, 2014, Williams was found dead at his home in Paradise Cay, California. He was 63 years old. The official cause of death was listed as suicide by hanging. He had no drugs or alcohol in his system. At the time, most coverage of his death focused on depression as the primary contributing factor. 3 months later, the autopsy results told a different story. Williams had Lewy body dementia, a progressive neurological disease caused by abnormal protein deposits called Lewy bodies that accumulate in the neurons of the brain. The condition affects thinking, memory, movement, and emotional regulation. His autopsy showed a case of exceptional severity, brain changes consistent with both Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. spread diffusely throughout his brain. Neurologists who reviewed the report described it as among the most advanced cases of Lewy body pathology they had encountered. His widow, Susan, became a prominent advocate for Lewy body dementia awareness, publishing a detailed medical account of her husband's final months in the journal Neurology. She described the disease as the terrorist inside her husband's brain, something that attacked every faculty he had, including the ones he had spent a lifetime building. She wrote that he was the most misdiagnosed patient they encountered, and that the disease had been present and advancing, while the people trying to help him were looking for something else entirely. Lewy body dementia affects approximately 1.4 million Americans. It remains one of the most frequently misdiagnosed conditions in neurology. Williams's case became one of the most significant in terms of raising public and medical awareness of what the disease looks like when it operates at speed. The stories people told after his death about his final months, the difficulty on set, the paranoia, the behavior that seemed out of character, were not the signs of breakdown. They were the signs of a disease destroying a brain from the inside, while the person inside that brain was still trying to show up and do the work. The story that follows takes us back in time, to a night that set the entire trajectory of his career in motion and happened largely by accident. Story 3. The alien who showed up on Happy Days. In the late 1970s, Robin Williams was a relatively unknown stand-up comedian trying to find his footing in Los Angeles. He had left Juilliard in 1976 before completing his degree. The school itself encouraged him to leave, reportedly because his improvisational talent was genuinely beyond what formal classical training could do anything with, and had been performing in the San Francisco comedy scene before moving south to Los Angeles. The story of how Williams got his television breakthrough is both specific and improbable. Gary Marshall, the producer of Happy Days, was developing an episode in which the main character Richie Cunningham encounters a visitor from outer space. The show needed an actor to play an alien named Mork. Casting calls had taken place, and auditions were held, but nobody who came in quite captured what Marshall was looking for. The alien character needed to feel genuinely strange, not a human doing a funny voice, but something that existed in a different relationship to gravity and expectation than other people. Williams came in for the audition. He sat down in the chair opposite Marshall in a way that no other candidate had. He sat on it, on top of it. The chair as furniture was apparently not sufficient as a concept for this particular audition. Marshall cast him on the spot. The episode aired in February 1978. The public reaction was immediate and large enough that Marshall created an entirely separate show built around the character, Mork and Mindy, which debuted in September 1978 on ABC. The show ran for 4 seasons and established Williams as one of the defining performers of his generation. The entire trajectory of his television and film career hinged on a single audition moment in which he engaged with a piece of furniture in a way that nobody else had thought of. The next story involves his work on stage in a setting very few of his fans ever saw. Performances so raw and unfiltered that the people who witnessed them described them as something closer to a natural phenomenon than a performance. Story 2. The Stand-Up Machine. 150 hours without stopping. Robin Williams' stand-up work, the stand-up specifically, rather than the films, represented a form of performance that people who witnessed it live described in terms that sound exaggerated and consistently turn out to be understatements. His approach to comedy was built on improvisation in a way that very few performers have ever genuinely achieved. He did not perform sets so much as use existing material as a skeleton from which an entirely unpredictable living thing would grow every night. His stand-up specials, including A Night at the Met in 1986, Live on Broadway in 2002, and Weapons of Self-Destruction in 2009, documented versions of this, the best available approximation of what watching him live felt like. Williams described his own creative process in terms of fire, something that burned at a temperature he could not always control. He spoke about the experience of performing as one that used the audience as fuel, where the larger and more responsive the crowd, the more intense the output became. Several people who performed alongside him in the early years in San Francisco described going to see Williams do 20 minutes and watching him go for 3 hours because he simply did not stop. The audience did not leave. There was no way to leave, because leaving would have meant missing whatever came next. Steve Martin described a quality in Williams's performance that he had not seen duplicated. a willingness to take the stage and go to any place the material required, without visible calculation or retreat. Billy Crystal spoke about Williams with a quality of reverence unusual among peers of equal stature, describing his comedy as something that operated by different physics entirely. Williams himself recognized the cost of performing at that intensity. He spoke openly about the post-performance isolation that followed, the crash proportional to the height he had reached during the show. In retrospect, those descriptions sounded like something more serious than the usual emotional arc of performance. The final story on this list is the one that ties all of them together, a decision Williams made near the end of his career that the people who were there described as one of the most generous things they ever witnessed. Story 1: the world tour that changed lives and wiped out his savings. In 2002, Robin Williams undertook what he described as a world tour, a series of performances across multiple continents specifically designed to entertain troops stationed in active service areas and conflict zones. This was not a USO tour in the traditional sense. It was more personal than that. Williams traveled to U.S. military bases in Germany, Kosovo, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, and Kyrgyzstan. He went to places that had virtually no entertainment infrastructure and where morale, the emotional state of young men and women who were hundreds or thousands of miles from home in conditions of extreme stress, was the only resource available to the people stationed there. By every account from the service members who were present, what Williams did on those stages was not a performance calibrated for a polished audience. It was improvisation in the specific environments he encountered, responding to what he found in front of him, adapting to spaces that were improvised themselves. He was performing in hangars, on concrete floors, in desert heat, for audiences who had not had access to entertainment of any kind for months. He had committed to the principle that the people who were doing the most difficult work in the service of the country deserved access to something that reminded them of the world they had left. He funded significant portions of the travel himself. He declined compensation. He did not publicize the tours in the way that a publicist would have recommended. The financial consequences of this and other acts of generosity were significant. Williams's estate, at the time of his death, was considerably smaller than the public assumption of a career of his magnitude would have suggested. Multiple sources close to him described a man who had given away enormous amounts of money over the course of his life, to friends, to causes, to strangers, without recording it or seeking recognition for any of it. The estate battle that followed his death between his wife and his children from previous marriages was partly a consequence of this. There was less to distribute than people had expected, and the unexpectedly modest sums produced a conflict that was painful for everyone involved. But the service members who were in those hangars and on those concrete floors in 2002, who sat in the desert heat and watched one of the most gifted performers in the world show up specifically for them, knew something about Robin Williams that the box office figures and the Oscar wins and the estate proceedings never quite captured. He came, he paid his own way, he stayed as long as they needed him to. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more history documentaries.